Hello everybody and welcome to Code with Beto. In this video we're going to learn how to create this mini game called Hidden Letter, and the idea is very simple. You have a bunch of letters and you're trying to find the one that is different. In this case this is the M, the Q, the P and the G, and this is the game pretty much, guys. We have a timer up here which is going to tell us the time that we take to solve 10 games. In this case you can change this variable as well, but yeah, every time we are getting a different board, different width and height and different letter as well, and we need to try to find the letter that is different. Once you are done finding the letter, which I can find at this point, this is a pretty fun game, guys. Here we go, the P and then the Q. And finally, when we win, we say, nice game, your time was 61:30. We can play again, and this is pretty much what we're going to be building, guys. Of course, you can extend this by adding extra functionality, and this is a very simple yet very nice game that you can build to improve your skills as a programmer, especially to improve your skills for object-oriented programming. And of course, if you want to download this project or just check it out on GitHub, you can go to codewithbeto.dev, and the projects part, you can check all the projects that we have in this channel, and you can download them, you can check them out, you can just see the video in here if you want and download the project or check the GitHub project. And yeah, guys, so this is not the project that we are going to be building because I haven't added yet, but as soon as I release this video, this project is going to be available at codewithbeto.dev. So make sure to check it out and like this video and subscribe before we start. And without further ado, let's dive right in. Okay, guys, the first thing that we need to do is create our React project. So I'm going to run the command npx create React app, and for this app I'm gonna name it Hidden Letter and hit enter. Now we need to wait a little bit until it is done installing the packages. Okay, it is almost done, and there we go. Now we need to access the folder that we just created. It's called Hidden Letter, and hit enter. And once we are in this project, we can open it on Visual Studio by running the command code dot, and then we can start the server by running npm start. Okay, let's hit enter, and just like that we have our project running on the localhost 3000. So I'm gonna just leave this terminal like this, and we can start working inside Visual Studio Code. Okay, so I'm gonna make this a little bigger just so we can see more clearly what we are doing in here. And the first thing that I want to do is just go to my app.js, my source folder, and let's create a new folder and call it components. And this is the folder in which we are gonna save all the components that we are gonna be building for this simple game. So let's hit enter, and now that we are here, I'm gonna create another folder, and this folder is gonna be called utils. Inside this folder we're gonna have functions that are going to help us to create simple functionality that we don't want to have inside a component or inside a file like app.js, and we want to abstract this functionality. So let's start by creating a new file inside this utils folder, and this let's start by creating a method or function that is going to be called createCell.js, and this is going to be a very simple function. I'm going to start by exporting it, so I'm going to say export function, and the name of this function is going to be createCell, and this simple function is going to return the initialization of each cell. Okay, and each cell is going to need a row and a column, so let's receive those as parameters in here, and we're going to return an object, right? So let's start by returning the row like this and the column, And here we can have all the information that we want to have in each cell. So it's hidden, for example, it's hidden equal to false. And we can also have like the value of the letter that each cell has. And we can pass this as a parameter as well. So I'm gonna say here letter. And I think this is all we need for this function. Very simple. And we have it extracted in this utils folder. Let's go ahead and create another util function. And this function is gonna be called createBoard.js. And as you can guess now, this function is going to help us to create a matrix or a 2D array to contain the letters that we want to hide, right? I mean, the idea is that we are going to have two letters. The first one is going to be the one that we are going to fill up the entire board, and the second one is going to be the hidden letter. So let's start by exporting function create board, and this function is going to create the board, right? But before, we need to import the function that we just created, that it's create cell, because we are going to need to create a cell for each square in the board. And also we're going to need to have like couples of letters, especially letters that are hard to see or hard to distinguish between one another. For example, B and D, C and D. And let me just delete these comments that I had in here. Of course, you can change this as you like. I just have these examples. The idea is that you have to have very similar letters, right? And we are going to graph for each game one of these random, and then one of these two random as well to fill the rows and columns, and one of these is going to be the hidden letter. Perfect. Now that we have those functions, I mean this array and this function imported, we can go ahead and down here in the create board, let's start by creating a new variable that is going to be an array called board, and this is going to be the matrix. So let's start by adding cells to this board. I'm going to start by iterating for each row all the way until the row is less than, and here something important, we want the board to change the width and height every time. So we need to generate a random number here, random row. Let's start by creating this random row, and it's going to be equal to math.floor. We want to floor a random value. Okay, let's say math.random. This is going to return a random value between 0 and 1, and to make sure that this is going to be a number between 0 and, for example, let's say 25, we can multiply this by 25. Okay, so now we can say in here that we want to be the less than random row each time, +1, and this +1 is very important because this random row can be 0. So if it's 0, we're not going to have a board, so make sure that you at least have 1 in there. And let's say row ++. Perfect. So now that we have these like this, we can simply duplicate this random row and generate a random column. It's going to be the same way. We can change this 20 to be, this 25 to be 20, and we can simply duplicate this for loop and change, instead of row, we can have a column, and it's going to be the same idea. And in this case, we're going to have random column in this position. And let's change this to be col as well. Now, let's close the curly braces, hit save. And now that we have this, we can start by creating a new row in this for loop. So this row is going to be an array as well. And inside this for loop, we can fill out this new row. So I'm going to say new row dot push, and what we want to push, remember that we have this method create cell. So we want to push all this information for each cell. So we can just call this function create cell and pass the parameters needed, which is the row, the column, and the letter. And the letter is going to be one of these random couples that we have in here. So we are going to need as well to grab a random letter. So I'm going to start here by saying const random idx equal to math.floor, and it's going to be the same idea dot random, and we multiply this by, in this case, we want to, this random idx is going to be to grab one of these couples. So let's multiply this random by the couples dot length, right? So we need to put that in parentheses, and let's say couples dot length minus 1. The reason I'm putting this in parentheses, it's because we are subtracting 1, and if we remove the parentheses, we are going to multiply first and then subtract 1, and that is going to be a pretty awful bug. So now that we have this in place, we have the random idx, so we can simply say const random couple, it's going to be equal to couples, which is the array at position random index. Perfect. Now each time we call this function board, we are going to have a different couple. Perfect. Now that we have the random couple, we need to grab a random letter. Remember that each one of these couples has 2 letters, so we need to grab one to fill out the board, and the other one is going to be the hidden letter. So the way I can think of doing this, we can declare another constant variable in here, if I can write correctly, and this is going to be random letter, and the random letter is going to be the same idea, but we just want to have a value between 0 and 1. So let's say math.random, and let's check if this random value is greater than 0.5. We want to assign 1 or grab the letter to the right. Otherwise, we want to grab the first letter at index 0. Okay, now that we have the random letter, we need to grab the other letter at the same position, and we are going to need to know if this is 1 or 0. Because if this is 1, in the case we have this couple, for example, if this is 1, we're going to fill out the board with 5, and we need to know that we are doing that and hide the 0 index, right? So we're going to need another variable, and this is going to be the hidden letter idx, and we can simply check the random letter. So if the random letter is equal to 1, it means that we would need to grab the index 0 in this case, otherwise we need to grab the index 1. This makes sure that we're going to grab always, or we're going to hide always the opposite letter, right, of these two. All right, so we have a bunch of variables at this point in here, but that's all we need for now. Okay, now we can go back in here in the part in we are creating this cell. We are passing the row, the column, and we are going to pass the random couple at the position random letter. Okay, now let's say after we push all that information, we can say board.push, and we are going to push the new row, this row that we create here with all the information that we just added. Perfect. After we have these, after we push all these inside the board, we can simply return the board. And before that, we are missing one more thing. We want to hide the letter, right? So I'm going to create a comment in here, and I'm going to say insert random hidden letter. Okay, we are going to come back to do this. Okay, now let's hit save for now, and let's go back to the app.js file. Let's start by deleting all of this information that we have in here. Let's just leave the app like that, And quickly, let's go to the app CSS and let's copy this background color, copy, and let's go back to the index CSS. And inside this body, we can add this background color to have it in all our applications. So I'm going to close this index.js file at this point. And inside this div, we are going to start creating the logic of the application. Let's remove this logo import and start by importing all as React from React. And inside this app component, let's start by creating the board using useState. So I'm gonna say board and set board. And if you are not very familiar with useState hooks, it's very simple. We use them when we want to create or have a state in our application or inside this specific component. And the way we use it is accessing it from React. So we can say use state in this case. And you can check here that this takes an initial value. And so we can call this function, an arrow function, and call the create board function that we created in our utils folder. And you can see that it gets imported automatically when I call it. So we want to create a board, and this is going to return us a matrix, and it's going to be saved in this variable board. Okay, and you can see here, if I do hovers over the board, we can see that we have an array of arrays that has a row, column, it's hidden, and a letter. Perfect. So now that we have those values, we can start to put in on screen the matrix. Okay, so inside this div, I'm going to start iterating for each row in this board. So I'm going to say map for each row, and the method map returns us a value, which is this row, and the second argument is going to be an index, and you can see here that it's an index. So this index, I'm going to call it row idx because we're going to need it in a moment. And let's open parentheses. And now for each row, we can do the same thing. I'm going to say, well, before we create the row, I'm going to create a div just to contain each row. And inside this div, we can have a row.map as well. And we are going to have pretty much the same thing that we have up here. But before we do that, let's add the key in this div. And the key is going to be the row idx. Remember that when we are iterating over arrays inside a React component, we need to provide this key for a better performance. So now let's do the same thing, but in this case, we are going to iterate over each element of each row. And so here we can say that we are going to grab the letter, and the second parameter is going to be letter idx. Let's open an arrow function again, parentheses, and in here we can have another div, and this div is going to be our cell. I'm just going to put cell like this, and remember that we need to add the key. So the key is going to be letter idx, and let's hit save for now. As you can see, in the right side we have this bunch of cells. I'm going to do this a little bit bigger. We have all these cells that we just created, and these are random. If I reload the page, we can see that we have a bunch of cells in this case. If I reload again, we can have a different number of cells each time. Okay, and why these cells are looking like this? Well, we need to add some style to the row component. So inside this div, I'm going to add a class name, and this class name is going to be equal to row. So now let's go to the app CSS, and inside this app CSS, I'm going to delete all this information that we don't need for now. And I'm going to add the class row, and I'm going to say just display flex and hit save. As you can see, we have this nice cell. I mean, each row now it's displayed from left to right. And let's leave that for now, just like that. But before we leave this component, I want to center all the items that are inside this app. So let's say display flex, Now let's say flex direction column, hit save, and align items center, hit save. Okay, I think that's good for now. Now let's go back to our components folder and let's create a cell component to render for each cell that we have in here. So I'm gonna call it cell.js. Okay, inside this cell component, I'm going to start by importing all as React from React and export default function. I'm going to export default this component cell. And one important thing here is that we are going to receive all the information that creates cell returns as a prop. So we can just copy this and go back to the cell component and specify that we are going to receive all this information as a properties. Okay, so let's delete this initializations and hit save. Okay, this way we can access or we can display the information for each row and each column. Okay, now let's do return, and what we are going to return, it's just going to be a simple div, and inside this div we can just display for now the letter that we are receiving as a property. Okay, let's hit save for now. And before we leave this component, I want to add a class name, and the class name that is going to have this each cell is going to be called cell as well. So now let's go back to the app.js, and instead of having this div in here, let's import our cell component, and this is going to be a self. So this is how we can render a cell for each letter that we have in here. Okay, now remember that we are receiving all the information for each cell, so we can simply spread all that information like this for each cell. Hit save now, and you can see that we have this this grid or this board of letters B in this case. If we reload the application, now we have W's, but now it's time to add some style to this cell so it doesn't look so bad. Let's go back to the styles, and let's start by saying that we need a color for the letters that is going to be snow, for example, and let's create another component, another class called cell. Now each cell is going to need a width and a height. I'm going to give it 20 pixels of width, and we are going to do the same with the height. We're going to need a background color if you want, or we can just leave it like that. It depends of you. I'm just going to leave it like that for now. And let's hit save. And as you can see, we have now that nice spacing. Let's go back to the app and add a h1 in here and call this game hidden letter. Okay, hidden letter, I don't know, game maybe. Okay, this is looking so much better. Now let's go back to the cell component. Now inside this cell component, if we change the letter to be the row and have a column in display, we can see that we have all those coordinates for each row and column. But these row and column are going to help us to identify which cell we need to, which cell the user is clicking on. So let's go back and put the letter in here. Now we need to add this functionality using a function, and this function is going to be passed as property as well. So let's add it in here, and I'm going to name it handle press or handle click. It doesn't matter, you can name it as you want. And we can add a on click event on this div. I'm going to say handle click. Let's hit save for now, and let's go to the app and create this handle click. But before we do that, guys, I want to add the letter that is going to be the letter hidden, because at this point we don't have any different letters. They're all the same, and I'm going to create a zoom just so you can see a little bit better. We don't have any letter that is different, all are the same. So let's go back to the create board file, And remember that we need to create this method insert random hidden letter. So let's go down here and create a function that is going to be called insert random hidden. Okay, we are going to pass as a parameter the word, the letter, and the number of rows and the number of columns that the board has at this point, because remember that these values are going to be generated random. So we need to pass them so we know which value what are the boundaries of the board. So now we need to do pretty much the same thing. We need to grab a row, but we need a random row, right? So let's do math floor, math.random, and multiply this by the rows. We can do pretty much the same thing for the columns, multiply by the number of columns. Now, we need to check if the word at the position row and column, which is this row and column that we are randomly generating, if this value is not null, we can update this value. How we can do that? We can simply copy this in here, and we can say that dot letter is going to be equal to letter. Remember that we need a letter to hide, so we are going to reassign the value that this cell had for the new letter that we need to find. And we can duplicate this and say that this is going to be the hidden one. So whenever the user presses this cell, they are going to win and pass to the next round. So now let's hit save now, and let's call this function insert random hidden, and pass the current word, pass the random couple, and this is going to be at the position hidden letter. Remember that we had the random letter and the hidden letter, and the hidden letter is going to be the parameter of this function. And then we need to pass the row, so I'm going to pass the random row and the random column, which are the boundaries of the board. Perfect. Now that we have this like this, we can hit save and reload. Okay, if I reload, you can see that we have in this case a different letter. In this case, we have D. And let's do this font a little bit more bold. So I'm going to say font weight bold, hit save, and we have now this difference. It's looking a bit better, I think. And if I reload, we are going to get every time a hidden letter. In this case is a hidden number, which is 2. Reload, and we have a random word with a random letter hidden, in this case this K. Perfect. So now let's add the functionality whenever the user presses these letters. Let's go back to the app.js file and create a function inside this component, which is going to be called handle click. Remember that we need to pass this function as a property to this cell component. So we are going to need the row and the column for this handle press. And we can check here if the board at position row and position column is hidden. If the user just press the letter that it's the one hidden, we can pass to the next game. And we can do that by setting the board again to the function create board. This is going to generate a new board, and we need to somehow pass to another level, right? This is going to be the new level, but we need to keep track of how many matches does the user need to win. So we are going to need to create another function, and another variable using useState, and I can just simply copy this, and this variable is going to be called games to win. How many games does the user need to win? So set games to win, and it's going to be equal to React useState, and let's say by now that we are going to need 3 games to win. Okay, so whenever the user finds a letter, let's say that set games to win is going to be equal to games to win -1. And after the user has won the game, we want to reset the board. But before we reset the board, I want to set a timeout so the user can have a nice break of half a second and we don't reload the screen right away. So I'm gonna say set timeout, and set timeout is going to receive a callback as a parameter, and the second parameter is going to be the seconds or milliseconds that we want to wait before we run this function. I'm going to say 500 for now, and inside this timeout I'm going to paste this set board. So we want to wait half a second and then reset the board. Perfect. And I think that's all we need for now. Let's just copy this handle click function and pass it as a property inside the cell. Handle click is going to be equal to handle click. Now, one important thing to notice here is that we need the row and the column. So we're going to need to go back to the cell component, and in here we need to pass the row and the column. So I'm going to create an arrow function, and let's pass the row and the column, hit save, and now we know which letter we are pressing. If I press the A, we see that we get another board, and in this board we need to find a B, which is in here, and let's press this B and we get another board. So this is working pretty good at this point, but we need to add a better user experience, because even if I do hover over these letters, my cursor is just for the text. It's not like a hand, or it's not like we are pressing a button. So let's go back to the app CSS. Down here we can say cell hover. Whenever we are doing hover, we can have a cursor pointer, hit save, and now if I go back, we have this nice hand. Now we can add a bunch of styles in here. For example, when the user has pressed an incorrect letter, so I'm going to create another class called incorrect, and this class is just going to give a color to the letter orange. Okay, and let's create another one when the user has the right guess. So I'm going to create another class, and this class is going to be has one letter, and this class is going to have a font weight of both bolder, and we can have a color, in this case can be, for example, green yellow, and let's say font size of 20, which is going to be a bit bigger. And perfect. So we can add now these classes whenever the user presses a letter that doesn't have the correct hidden letter, and whenever the user presses the letter that is the one or the hidden letter, we are going to change that letter to be green, wait 500 milliseconds, and then generate another board. So let's go back to the cell component, and let's add a function inside this component, and this function is going to be handle cell. This function is going to be a validation of if this to check if this if the user has pressed the one that is hidden. If the user has pressed the one that is hidden, we need to update the state, and otherwise we need to update as well the state and update the style of this cell. So let's start by creating some state in here. I'm going to call this has1, set has1, and this is going to be equal to React use state, and we are going to initialize this to be false. Let's copy this one more time and set one for the incorrect, and set incorrect. Okay, we're gonna be using use state for both. So if the user presses the cell that is hidden, we can set has1 equal to true, and we can set a timeout as well for 500 milliseconds, and we can say set has one equal to false again, because whenever we generate a new board, we don't want this letter to still green or this position to still green. Okay, and we can copy pretty much this this little logic that we have in here, but instead of set has one, set incorrect equal to true, and then set incorrect equal to false, like this, after 500 milliseconds. And then we can call this function. So I'm going to cut it and then paste it here. And now we can just delete this arrow function that we had in this onClick event, and let's just say handle cell, like this. Now if I hit save now, we are not going to do anything because we need to add those classes in here. So I'm going to add those classes in here by putting this inside curly braces, and then we can check if the user has one. If the user has one, we want to add the letter has one. I mean the class has one letter, and then we want to add the cell class. Otherwise, we want to check if the user pressed the incorrect letter, and if that's the case, we want to add the incorrect class and the cell class, right? And otherwise, we just want to have the cell class. If I hit save now, you can see that it's going to look like this. And let's go back again and press these incorrect values or incorrect cells, and they are orange for half a second, and then they turn white. And if we press the correct one, which is, I believe, this 0, no, I'm not sure which one I'm looking for. Oh, it's this O. You can see this game is pretty hard. Let's press it, and this is going to generate, this is going to change this letter to be green and then generate a new board after 500 milliseconds. Okay, and there we have it. So now we can just add or keep track of how many games the user has played in order to win, and we can do that inside the app JS. So let's close this cell for now. Let's close this app CSS as well, and let's close the create board file. So inside this app, we can add another variable for keeping track of how many games, or we can just add a use effect to keep track how many games we still need to win. So let's create a react.use effect, and the use effect is going to take two parameters. The first one is going to be a callback function, and the second one is going to be an array of dependencies. And the dependencies are going to be the games to win, because we want this effect to run whenever the games to win changes. And we want to also add a timer so the user knows how many seconds the user has taken. Okay, so let's say const timer equal to set timer. Let's create this timer super quickly using react.useState. This is going to be initialized to be 0. And then we can just have some logic inside this use effect. But before we do that, I'm going to add this timer as a dependency. And I write this wrong. This is const timer as a dependency. Okay, so whenever the timer changes, we need to update the timer inside this use effect. And as well, we need to change if the game is over, right? So we can say if games to win is greater than 0, we want to run the timer. So we can use a set interval. So I'm gonna say interval equal to set interval. And this interval is a function that is going to be constantly calling a callback function each time we provide, okay? For example, I'm going to create this callback, and the time that I'm going to provide that I want to update this or run this function is going to be every 100 milliseconds. And here I'm gonna set timer equal to timer plus 1, and that's all we need for now. Now, whenever the component is unmounted, we need to clear this interval. So I'm gonna say clear interval, and we pass the ID of the interval, which is the interval that I have here. So if the component is unmount, we prevent memory leaks by clearing the interval like this. Perfect. So now that we have this timer, we can show it on screen. So I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this H1, and let's say time, and the time is going to be equal to timer. Hit save, and there we have our timer. But this timer is looking pretty ugly. So what we can do is have another variable and call this variable milliseconds, for example. And because we are running this every 100 milliseconds and we need 1000 milliseconds to have a second, we can simply say timer divided by 10 and then format this to be fixed to, because I want to show 2 decimals. And let's go back inside this component, and instead of rendering the timer, we can render the milliseconds, and hit save, and it's gonna look this way now. Now if I reload, it's going to start at 0, and we get as well another board. Perfect. So now that we have the time, we need to display as well, and I can simply duplicate this again. I'm going to display the games to win. Okay, so I'm gonna say games to win is going to be equal to games to win. In this case, we need to win 3 games, and these letters are getting pretty big, so I'm going to change this to be a P tag, and as well I'm going to change this to be a P tag, so we don't have and I can also just comment this for now, and we're just gonna have the time and the games to win. Perfect. So every time the user wins or hits a green letter, we can just update the games to win. And we already have that setting here, games to win, games -1 each time. Whenever the games to win it's equal to 0, we are going to stop, right? We're going to stop the timer. So let's try to do this. I'm going to restart and I'm going to try to win. There we go, and this is pretty hard and huge. I need to find the letter. As you can see, guys, this is a pretty fun game, pretty simple. Oh, there we go. Nice. And you. Perfect. So I won, and we need to remove the board whenever we won. And as you can see, the timer stopped. It took me 18 seconds to find the 3 games, or to win the 3 games, and games to win it's equal to 0. Now, whenever we won, we need to change some of the UI that we have in here. So instead of showing the games to win whenever we have one, we're gonna check if the games to win it's equal to 0. We are going to have a P tag, for example, and otherwise we're going to have the games to win, which is going to be this P tag that we had already. And whenever the games are 0, we're gonna say congratulations, and we can have even an emoji here super quickly. Congratulations, and we can just say your time was, and show the timer, show the milliseconds. Perfect. And now we can just show the timer or the milliseconds whenever the games to win is greater than 0, because if it's 0, we're going to show it again, right? So if it's greater than 0, we can simply say show the time like this. Now, so because we won, we're going to have this message, your time was 18, and I think that's pretty much all we need. And now we need to hide the board, but before we hide the board, I'm going to put it inside a div. So let's copy all this inside this div, and we can just basically do the same. If the games to win it's greater than 0, we want to show this game or this div, and this okay, so I'm going to create a div in here, hit save, and inside this div we are going to put this board really quickly, cut and paste, hit save, and there we go. If the games to win are greater than 0, we are not going to display the board, otherwise we are going to display it like this. And let's play again. In this case we need to find the B, the L, and let's Q. Okay, my time was 8 seconds at this point. I'm getting pretty good. And of course you can change the games to win to be 10, for example. And yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I wanted to show you. This is a pretty fun project, and this is a pretty fun game which can easily be you can easily spend hours playing this game and changing the variables. For example, you can have a bunch of letters, and let's say that you want to find a specific letter, and you can let the user know, and you can change the game as you like. And that's pretty much all I wanted to show you guys. So this is a very simple game, but it's going to help you, by creating this game, it's going to help you to reinforce your object-oriented programming skills, and you are going to have fun in the process. And yep, so as a final note, guys, remember to subscribe if you like this video and give it a like. Go to codewithbeto.dev/projects if you want to check out the code for this project for free, of course. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye.